My client was a convicted stalker, and I had no idea. When she came in for her brow lamination, I took an interest in her because she looked kinda strange. She was very unkempt and like frumpy, and had this frizzy hair, and her eyebrows were a complete mess. When we met, she was really timid and would barely speak, but as the session went on, she started opening up a little bit. Anyway, I asked her how she'd come across the salon, and she told me she saw my social media pages. Then one day I start seeing this account popping up following me. I could tell it was a spam account. No profile, no photos, but what was weird was that they were only following me. Anyway, so time passes, and this client comes in and out every now and then for treatments. I start noticing she's becoming more put together, getting her nails done a certain way, dressing a certain way, and she even gets her hair done. She was starting to look like me. Every time I saw her, she adopted another one of my traits or something. But messages at 4 a.m. and they'd all say the same kind of thing. What are you doing right now? And do you think about me? I blocked the account, obviously, but another profile would pop up with the same kind of questions, all at 4 a.m. And it was like the more I blocked, the more accounts would pop up. So it's a couple of months later that at 4 a.m. every morning, these lights start switching on. We figured it was a cat or something, but then one day at 4 a.m., I got an Instagram message, another spam account, and all the message said was, "I'm outside." So my husband and I checked the security footage to see who was outside, and we couldn't believe what we saw. Every morning at 4 a.m., the same old Honda Civic would pull up to the front of our house, and someone would get out the car, but they wouldn't stay there. With every video, they'd come closer and closer to the house, and eventually, they came so close I could see them in full view. It was the woman from the salon. Of course, my husband and I were freaking out, so I go on Instagram and write a message telling the account owner that I know who they are and to leave me alone or I'd get the police involved. I think that was possibly the worst decision I could make because after that, I'd receive a message every 5 minutes, just saying the most disgusting things like how they were gonna skin me alive and wear my flesh as a suit, and that they were watching me sleep every night. So my husband and I went to the police, handed in all the footage and the messages, and waited to see if they could identify her. And for a while, there were no 4 a.m. visits until a week before my birthday. We were asleep when we heard this pounding at the door. Obviously, we're freaked out, so my husband grabs his gun and goes to check who it is. And it's this woman just banging her fist against the door. So now she's on our property again, so we call the police, give a description, everything, and just kind of wait. They send a patrol car, and I don't know why, but for some reason the woman doesn't leave. I mean, she can see the police are there, but it was like she didn't care. They did run her name through the system, and she'd had a previous felony for stalking this guy she went on 2 dates with. The police told me she'd stalked him for an entire year before legal action was taken. Anyway, so the police look in the trunk of the car and they find scalpels, rope, cable ties, plastic sheets, and a bunch of tools that butchers use in slaughterhouses. But what was even more weird was that she had a birthday card in the trunk too, addressed to me. We guessed she was fully planning on killing me. Anyway, having to go private on social media definitely hurt my business, but ultimately, there's no other choice.
I was just shaping her brows when she casually told me her boyfriend cheated on her with her dad. And trust me, that's not even the worst part. Let me set the scene. It's a regular Thursday afternoon. My 2 p.m. client walks in. Let's call her Jasmine. She's usually bubbly, always laughing, always with some crazy dating story. But today, dead silent. No makeup, hoodie up, red eyes like she hasn't slept in days. She slumps into the chair and just whispers, "I found out my boyfriend's cheating." And I go, "Girl, do we need to do a full wax or just the brows today?" She doesn't laugh. She just looks me dead in the eye and says, "It was with my dad." My hand literally shook holding the spoolie. I was like, "Wait, what?" She sighs, wipes a tear, and goes, "I came home early for his birthday. I had candles, cake, the whole surprise thing, and I found them on the couch, kissing my boyfriend and my dad. I dropped the tweezers," she continues. "They didn't even jump apart. My boyfriend had the nerve to smile at me. And my dad, he just said, 'I didn't want you to find out like this.'" Like this? There's no version of that makes it okay. Then she drops another bomb. They've been seeing each other for 4 months. While she was living with him. While she was talking about marriage. While they were planning to get a dog together. But here's where it gets darker. Jasmine tells me it didn't start after we got together. It started before. I'm like, "Wait, what do you mean?" And she goes, "I think I was just the cover. I think he dated me just to get close to my dad." I had full body chills. She found secret messages on her boyfriend's laptop, DMs from over a year ago, flirty, desperate, talking about how he couldn't wait to finally have him to himself. And her dad, apparently he told her mom it was her fault for being emotionally distant. Her mom left him. Jasmine's family imploded in a week, all because of this one man. And here's the real kicker. Her ex-boyfriend and her dad are now officially together. They posted a soft launch on Instagram, a hand-holding pic at a sushi restaurant. Jasmine saw it, same place her ex took her for their first anniversary. Her voice cracked as she told me, "He used my life as a stepping stone." My dad let him walk right over me. I was speechless. She just laid back and said, "Let's finish the brows. I want to look hot for when I run into them. They don't get to see me broken." And let me tell you, when she walked out of my salon, head high, lashes done, brows snatched, she looked like revenge in heels. Moral of the story? Always listen when your gut says something's off, and maybe, just maybe, never trust a man who gets too close to your dad.
I shaped a 4-year-old's brows and the internet tried to cancel me, but they don't know the whole story. I've been a brow tech for 15 years. I've done brows for brides, celebrities, influencers, everyone. But the ones that get me the most hate online? The little girls. I've worked with girls of all ages, 11, 8, even 4-year-olds. The ones people swear are too young to be thinking about this stuff. But let me tell you why I do it. For instance, I had an 8-year-old client last month. She walked in with her hoodie pulled halfway over her face and wouldn't even make eye contact with me. Her mom said she hadn't wanted to go to school for 3 days because kids were calling her a gorilla. Another kid said she looked like a boy with a wig. And don't even get me started on the Frida jokes. I swear, kids can be meaner than adults. Now I know what people say. She's too young for beauty treatments. Let her be a kid. But you know what? I was that kid. I had thick brows and a little peach fuzz. The boys in class called me Chewbacca in the 3rd grade. I used to pray my mom would let me wax them. She never did. So when that little girl sat in my chair, I didn't see a client. I saw myself. I didn't shave her down or make her look like an Instagram model. I cleaned up the center, brushed them out, and gave her shape. When I handed her the mirror, her face lit up. She turned to her mom and said, "Now I can go back to school." You're gonna tell me that's wrong? That confidence doesn't matter because she's 8? I get why people question it. I do. But I will always believe that helping a little girl feel beautiful on her terms isn't too grown. It's protection. It's healing. Because I know what it's like to be 11 years old, hiding behind your bangs, hoping no one looks too close.
Everybody thought I lost my mind when I walked away from a 6-figure job. So, I had what most people would call a dream job. Tech, 6 figures, benefits. Everyone around me thought I was set for life. And don't get me wrong, it paid the bills, it looked good on paper, but inside, I was miserable. Every day felt like I was dragging myself into a role that wasn't me. Staring at code, endless Zoom calls, sitting in front of a screen for 10 hours straight. I felt drained, burnt out, and honestly, trapped. But then there was this little thing I did on the side, eyebrows. Shaping, waxing, I loved it. It didn't feel like work. Whenever I picked up my tweezers, I felt alive in a way I never did sitting in front of a computer. So one day, I did the unthinkable. I quit, walked away from my cushy salary and told everyone I was going full-time as a brow tech. And let me tell you, my family's reaction? Brutal. My mom straight up said, "You're throwing your future away to be somebody's eyebrow girl?" My dad kept asking me if it was just a phase. My friends didn't get it either. They thought I was crazy. And I won't lie, it was hard at first. No guaranteed paycheck, building my clientele from scratch. There were nights I'd sit in my little studio, staring at my empty appointment book thinking, did I just ruin my life? But then, slowly, things shifted. Clients started coming in. They left happy, brought their friends, left reviews, sent referrals. My little crazy decision started turning into an actual career. And every time someone sat in my chair and left with confidence radiating off their face, I felt something money in tech could never give me: purpose. It hasn't all been easy, and it definitely wasn't overnight. But I've learned that chasing your passion might not make sense to everyone, and that's okay. Because at the end of the day, I'd rather be broke with brows than rich and miserable behind a screen.